change the world is by recognizing how far back women are, and by companies and governments working together to actually change it and take positive action.
Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Heather Long, an economics correspondent here at the Post, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Cairns, the Global Vice Chair of Mastercard, sometimes known as Mastercard's Ambassador to the World. And we're here for a really interesting discussion about how we get more women and more people of color into leadership positions at businesses around the world. Welcome to Post Live, Anne.
It's lovely to be here, Heather. Thank you.
So I want to start with the statistic that so many of us know well, and that is that of the Fortune 500 or the S&P 500 companies, only 37 are headed by women, and that happens to be the most ever, but it's still such a depressingly low number, 37 out of 500. And I know you're part of this initiative, this group of the 30% Club. You're hoping to get these numbers closer to 30%. Can you give us a sense of where we are now and how can we speed up the progress?
Yes, well, in terms of the 30% Club, we've made quite a lot of progress in the last 10 years. We started in Britain when we had less than 10% women on boards. And now in the FTSE 100, we've got over 36% women on boards, and in the FTSE 350, 34%. Meanwhile, the club moved around the world. It's now in the US and Canada and Japan and Australia, about 20 countries in the world. The latest place we opened was Mexico. And of course, it's a very different picture depending on where you are in the world, Heather. I mean, Japan opened 2 years ago. At that time, they had only 7% women on boards, and they've moved in 2 years to 13%, which is quite dramatic. And the members of the club are basically chairmen and CEOs of some of the most powerful companies in the world, roughly about 1,000 companies as we speak. But you're quite right, although we're making progress in the boardrooms and we are making some progress in the C-suites, it's around about 23% in the C-suites. That top position is still, a long way off being attained by many women.
Well, but 23% is certainly a little bit better. Some of those numbers are very encouraging in different countries. I'm curious to hear your take on quotas. A number of countries and the state of California, from South Africa to parts of Europe, have instituted quotas. So companies, particularly on their boards, are mandated by law to have, like in California's case, at least one woman. Other countries have it as 30%, more like what your target is. Do you support some sort of quota, or do you think that backfires?
Well, I've got two opinions about it. The first thing is I prefer not to have quotas. And the reason for this is that I think that you want real cultural change. And the 30% Club actually sets aspirational targets that CEOs and chairmen sign up for themselves of their own volition. And if that happens, you know that in publicly listed companies, they will drive the change. And so you're getting cultural change in the companies. If you're just telling people what to do, then that's not necessarily achieving the change you want. Also, I don't particularly like the Californian model of just at least one woman, because it's a kind of one and done thing. And the 30% is based on a little bit of science of, once you get to that tipping point of having more than 30% of, a certain minority in the room, then they cease to be a minority. And that's what we've been thinking of.
Yeah, that's a really good point about a critical mass to really change the thinking. I'm curious, this is such a broad question, but in your experience, what you think the top one or two things that hold women back are. And, I ask this as someone, I'm in my late 30s, who came of age in the lean-in era. We were all told if we just raised our hands more, if we spoke up more, that we would make it. And obviously there has been a few more women, as we were just discussing, elevated to the C-suite. But I think when I look at my younger peers, there's such more of a recognition now from them and a calls from them about biases in the workplace, and these unconscious biases that are often holding back women and people of color from being elevated. And so I'm curious to get your take. Do you sort of lean one way or the other these days and thinking what is the real barrier here to getting women and people of color to the top?
Well, I mean, I actually don't think we should be fixing the women, and we shouldn't be fixing the people of color. I think that you're quite right that the system isn't a level playing field, and we have to admit that to ourselves. And then we have to do everything in our power to make it a level playing field. An example I want to give you of this is in our company, Mastercard, we decided that we would institute global maternity and paternity leave everywhere in the world, all over 200 countries in which we operate. And it's 4 months for each parent. It can apply to single-sex couples as well. Now, why does this make a difference, and why is that good for women? Well, actually, what you're doing there is you're causing people to look at young people that are working for them and not think, oh, here's a woman, she's probably going to go on maternity leave and have a family. You're actually looking at your team and saying, oh, they're a young person. At some point, they're going to be a parent and have a family. You've automatically rebalanced between men and women there. And also you're telling the men, this is a good thing to do, to actually be involved in the upbringing of your kids and to actually share the family load. And I think things like this will change how women do in the environment.
Yeah, huge push for that here in the United States. We'll see what happens in the coming months as well on the federal level. I guess, is that something that you think should happen in the United States to have, they've been talking about 12 weeks, so almost as generous as your policy, more like 3 months of paid parental leave in the United States. Is it time?
I think it's time to recognize that paid parental leave is needed to really get the talent retained in the workforce that you want to retain. And I think COVID has shown us that. Working through COVID, working remotely, having the technology that you and I are using today, it's great. But, if you're in a situation that you've got no childcare at home and you're homeschooling and it's just one partner that's actually bearing the load of that, or you've got single parents and so on, it can be, really intense. And I've read that many women in the states that have been surveyed have actually thought about stepping back from their careers as a result of the experience that they've had last year during COVID.
And unfortunately, the data shows that many did do that, with about 2 million women who left the workforce entirely. Quite a few were parents of young children. I'm curious to hear what other ways Mastercard is likely to see some permanent changes in workforce culture coming out of the pandemic. Like, will people be able to work from home, or will you be doing more of this hybrid model going forward?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, we were always flexible even before COVID. So I think that the companies that went into COVID and were able to use their technology and were able to work flexibly in the first place, actually, were in much better shape than other companies. So I think a fair amount of people want to come back to the office. People won't necessarily be in the office all week. I actually had a job where I ran everything for Mastercard outside America and was traveling over 40 weeks a year. So you could hardly say that I was actually working from one place or another. I was usually probably working from an airport. But the point being that I think to give people choice is the right way forward.
And what are people saying in your company as you do surveys? What do they want? I think as I look at some of the surveys in the US companies that are asking their employees what they want more of, it's been interesting to see backup childcare rising up the list. People wanting some help from their company in situations that are crises or emergency, even after the pandemic ends. I'm curious at Mastercard, what are you hearing that employees really want and value beyond kind of flexibility?
Yes, they definitely want that, and we actually do provide that and have provided that before the pandemic, actually. And I think it's something that, again, companies that have thought of these things have a better appreciation of people's work-life balance, have fared better. I think also, but people want to collaborate with their colleagues. People do want flexibility, as you say, but they want much more than that. They want to thrive in their working environment. Um, People care quite a lot about working for a company with purpose. And we give time off to actually spend time on things that you're passionate about in terms of, giving back to society, as well as having things on our own agenda, such as financial inclusion, such as, taking that $500 million that we took and investing in Black communities in the States across a number of cities. And our employees like to get engaged in things like that we're doing. So I think it's a holistic thing that people want. I mean, of course, because we're a global company, we've been very engaged in helping out in India, helping with field hospitals, mobile field hospitals that are coming on, because many of our staff work in India, and most of our staff, all of our staff, have had experiences of family and friends in serious and sometimes fatal circumstances. So I think you have to think about the needs of everyone around the world, the things they're experiencing in their life at this time, and respond to it as a company.
Mm. I'm so glad you brought up Black communities, and I know that you look at a lot of this research too. Certainly the numbers in the UK and the US are really distressing, particularly showing Black women are constantly and consistently the lowest paid and the least likely to be promoted. What are you learning about why this is and what it's going to take to really change the game, specifically for Black women?
Yeah, we're learning a lot about that. Actually, at the moment, Mastercard's doing a study with the London School of Economics about the lived experience of Black women in the business world, which I think will be very interesting. There isn't a lot of data on that in Britain. I know there's many more studies have been done in America. And in the 30% club context, we have just launched a chapter looking at this, what is happening to people of color, and what about the intersectionality of women of color. That's actually led by Sophie Chanduka, who works in a day job with Morgan Stanley, kind of half in New York and half in London, because she has a global job. And she was talking yesterday to a bunch of headhunters together with me about the lived experience of it. She was saying when she went to get positions on boards, her credentials were being really examined and questioned. As if, she was different from other people, that they just didn't stand by themselves. And I think this is the thing that we often forget, that men forget. It's very different for them from women, and that white women like me forget about, how people look at women of color and start questioning, well, how good are you really? And did you really sort of achieve this? I mean, she's been a lawyer in her time and is now a kind of head of operations. So I think we need to be listening now, and then again, not fixing the women, they don't need fixing, not fixing the minorities, but saying, how can you be asking different questions in an interview? We need to fix the way that we interview people, the questions that we ask in interview and the way that we think about it.
Wow, that is just a stunning, stunning example. I mean, very true. Many people have stories like that, but it's just so wrong. Um, I want to talk a little bit about this push that we've also seen in the last year towards racial justice. There's been a global reawakening, these protests happening. I'm curious to hear what tangible steps Mastercard is taking. I think many of us did see your statement, for instance, on April 1st that was calling in the United States to ensure that there would be fair elections and everybody would be able to vote who can vote. So sort of your voice was one of many corporations speaking out against some of these voter restriction bills that are being discussed in different states. But are there other tangible ways that things have really shifted in the last few months at Mastercard around these racial justice and inclusion initiatives?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a raft of things that we're doing that go under the title of a project that we called Solidarity. And I mentioned that we'd taken $500 million and are investing in Black communities across 7 big cities in the States. We're actually looking at getting capital funding towards minority-owned businesses. And particularly, we've got projects that are very focused on Black women-owned businesses. That as you just pointed out, Heather, suffer more than anyone. These businesses need things like capital, but they also need training. They need access to digital products. We're looking at our own supply chains and saying, are we actually fair in terms of the companies that we use around the world? Have we got enough women-led companies in there? Have we got enough Black-led companies in there? There's just amazing raft of things we're doing. We're also looking at our own personnel, and we've committed to have 50% more vice president and above Black Americans in our company by 2025.
Wow, that's but that's, you don't see that as a quota. Earlier on, you were sort of dismissive of quotas, but that seems like a pretty hard target that you're instituting.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that setting targets for yourself is so different from the government giving you a quota.
I see. Okay. And can I push you a little bit there? Obviously, Mastercard, you process so many transactions around the world, but some of the things I see on forums, racial justice forums, is some people are upset that maybe Mastercard. Why would you still do business or process transactions for white supremacist groups? Is there kind of a rethink at the company about whether certain businesses or organizations should be excluded from the platform?
I mean, our company stands, look, basically when, we are here to follow the law. And if we come across anybody using our our payments systems in an illegal way, and I can think of things, for example, a website, say, with child pornography. If we found that, we would close it down immediately. And also, if we found people doing harm to other people, we would, take action on that. But it's not for us in the corporate world to actually be making a judgment about this. We leave that to the lawmakers, and then we act really quickly.
We've got a lot of great questions from women around the world who are seeking your advice, so I'm going to get to those in just one second. But I do want to ask you about one of the big hot button issues of the day here. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and that is this big debate about whether the U.S. economy is overheating and we are going to see inflation come roaring back. So I'm curious just to get your take. Is inflation a concern in your mind for the U.S. or other parts of the world?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are many ways to manage out of this crisis, and there's a lot of discussion about K-shaped recovery. Inflation is certainly one way that, you could come out of a crisis like this, though many of the economists that I talk to around the world are very doubtful about that, because they just feel that the sort of prolonged level of negative, near negative interest rates, would be preventing that. But I'm not an economist, Heather, so I leave that to them.
Fair enough. So we've got this great network tuning in, PowerToFly. It's a women's professional network that helps to lift women up and find ways to get their resumes in front of key leaders. So I want to ask a few of their questions. This is what Lauren wrote in to say. She was curious what skills women need to develop to become successful, specifically in the finance industry, so your industry. She asked, what would you say is your most appreciated quality from your peers that's really set you apart?
Well, I do think, well, I don't think that there's one quality, but I do think that it's helpful in life to be very straightforward and trust. People have got to be able to trust you. They might disagree with you on topics, but they've got to know where you stand. And I've actually found it wonderful to have a sense of humor as well in life, because especially if you're in the middle of a crisis, and I was restructuring Lehman quite a few years ago through their Chapter 11. Sometimes you just need to take things off the boil and be able to relax and really connect with people. And I think that's helpful in any corporate environment. So developing those personal connections that, build out your network over time is the thing that ultimately is going to help you be successful, I think.
Yeah. Lydia asked an interesting one. Many people may not know, they see you as this finance executive now, but that you actually started your career as a research engineer, if I've got that right. And so she asked, it's amazing to read that you moved up to these different roles after starting as more of an engineer. What advice would you give to young women who may be in their first or second job to really make that leap into something different, or into a more of a leadership role?
Well, I think the kids growing up today are going to live 100-year lives, and my life is kind of a bit sort of, you go to school and university, you work, and then eventually you retire, though I don't know when that's actually going to happen, because it seems that you then go on to get all of your board seats and do many other things besides. But it's kind of a 3-tier life. If you're going to live to about 100, you could be working for, I don't know, 60, 70 years, in which case you're probably going to change career quite a lot. And I think that you should accept that from the outset and should build a set of skills which are all about continuous learning, being curious, wanting to know and understand the latest things. When I switched from being an engineer to a banker, I did so because the company I worked for, British Gas, was privatizing. I could see that the people moving to the top of the company were not the engineers, they were the finance types. And I thought, I've got the wrong skill. If I wanted to be the head of a company here, I better go and find out about finance. And I ended up applying to Citibank and staying there for 15 years. So I found out a little bit about finance in that time.
That's fascinating. Fascinating. Here's another one. Morgan asks, what's it going to take to reintroduce women to the workspace after 2020? We were speaking earlier about how many women have dropped out or had to scale back. What can companies, I know Mastercard has some initiatives, but what can companies do to bring women back quickly?
Well, first of all, I think that you have to welcome them back. And I don't think you just have to welcome women back. I think you have to welcome your employees back. And actually, funnily enough, we were just talking about this as a management team the other day about how do you make the whole environment welcoming and fun. And it can be sort of having events that just make people feel connected. We're quite lucky because we have fantastic sponsorships around the world, in the sporting arena and music and so on, and we can organize events around this. So these are kind of things that we've been mulling over in our minds, but I think in respect of women, it's really respecting who they are and what they're facing, and as I said, thinking about how to get that balance right when you're in the working world. Now, I read actually somewhere, Heather, that they did a study in 6 countries, and they included the US, UK, China, Japan, and Italy and South Korea, and they said that 24% of job losses would actually, women were 24% more likely to have permanent job losses. I actually think what happens in this situation is that women often go into their own businesses, start doing more entrepreneurial things. So I think that we have to put our brains to thinking about how to help women SMEs, how to help them digitize, learn to run their businesses.
That's a really good point. I've certainly spoken to some women who've transitioned in the last few months, if not the last few years, to running their own business, which is we should encourage. Here's another one that may not surprise you to hear from a young woman. Adrian writes in about cryptocurrencies, which are all the rage these days. I believe Mastercard just announced that the company will now facilitate crypto on your network. And I believe you also have a new credit card out that gives rewards in crypto and a partnership with another organization. So Adrian had asked, how do you think people will use crypto to pay as a payment for? I mean, we're seeing a little bit of it, but sort of, do you think it'll really take off? And will Mastercard invest in Bitcoin or some other crypto?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Bitcoin versus stable coins is very different. We have done surveys around the world, and we're certainly finding in the Gen Y that there's a lot of interest in actually using crypto on a day-to-day basis. And so, we're investing in a lot of different blockchain solutions, by the way, not just for cryptocurrencies, but for things like provenance, which is basically if I order something, is the thing that I ordered, is it the real thing, if you like? And also things like smart contracts. So I think there's many ways that you could use blockchain technology, and we've just announced that we're bringing on another 6 startup companies that we're working with in the blockchain space. But back to crypto, we do believe that stable coins have a future, and we believe that many central banks are looking at their own digital currency, and we're helping them to do this by building sandboxes. So absolutely, it's part of the future.
Yeah, wow, that's something. The last one, thank you. You've been very generous with your time today. I want to ask this last question. I was sort of trying to debate how I would answer it. It's very deep, but Maureen writes in and asks, what do you see as your purpose in life? And has it always been the same, or has it changed?
I think that your purpose changes as you grow older, and the reason for that is that you start to really think about what legacy you're leaving. At least I started to think about that a few years back. And I started to think, when I joined the working world, I was a research scientist, as you mentioned, and I was the only woman in my research station. They were all men, apart from the typing pool. I was the only woman engineer. And it was quite interesting. I was 22 at the time. And our first woman prime minister, who was also a scientist, she came to visit us at the research station, and I met her there. That was quite fascinating, because many times she was the only woman in her field as well. And I thought, my purpose is that I don't want women to be in that position for much longer. Well, it's changing, but it's not changing fast enough, as you started with. So I'm spending most of my life now thinking, how can I make sure that the women who come after me, can rise to the top of their companies, can take their place in the world. Because quite frankly, we're losing trillions of dollars in lifetime earnings by not giving their women place in society. And I don't think that we're designing a good world by not having enough women involved and in mind as we design things. I just honestly believe as we move into the AI age and we start going 5G and adopting all the new technology, we've got to have women take their place in designing these things so that we actually build a world that works better for everyone. And it's my job to try and make sure that that happens, or at least I'm going to do the most I can do in this space.
Well, that's a great legacy to leave, and we certainly need more efforts around it. And Cairns, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today for Washington Post Live.
Thank you very much, Heather. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Great questions. Thank you.
And thanks to our audience around the world. Please join us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We will be hosting a discussion with Senator Elizabeth Warren about her new book that has just come out, Persist. We'll see you then.